In a lot of cases you think, okay, more memory is better. In a lot of cases that can be true. It gives you more ability to do things. But yeah, in a networking context, routers use memory, or obviously it's got to run the base operating system and all that. But for networking, it has queues or buffers of packets that it's dealing with data. So as data is coming in and leaving the router, it has to buffer that. If it didn't have any buffers, if it wasn't ready to deal with something right now, it would drop it and you would have all sorts of packet loss. So you need a little bit of buffering your memory. But if you have too much, then you end up with packets sitting, too much buffering or too much memory being used for buffering. You have packets sitting in these queues for long periods of time, and it adds to the latency of packets going through the router. So they end up sitting there waiting in line forever. It's a traffic jam, basically.
And that is the dreaded buffer bloat. When packets get piled up in your router waiting to be sent, it's buffer bloat stuck in your memory.
And so different applications have different priorities about what they prefer. If you have a big download going full speed, downloading at a gigabit, you're going to use a lot of buffer memory because you want to have all these packets ready to go right away, but it can increase the latency over the connection. So if you have something else going that wants a quick response, video call, browsing the websites, and you want to get the responses back with your images and your web page very quickly, that can get slowed down from all these download packets sitting in the queue. And so yeah, there's different strategies for dealing with that. Different routers can cap how big these buffers get. And they can also have tactics for, if you have these big download flows that are going, they can drop packets from that flow to tell it to slow down and still let other packets go through quickly. You can have different flows of traffic kind of being balanced out. Speedify does some of that. So, we're tracking all your different traffic per flow, and we have a little bit of this buffer bloat mitigation where if there's one flow that's hogging a lot of traffic, we'll drop packets from that flow and, to try and keep the latency low for everything and keep things balanced without decreasing the performance too much. You still want to allow you to get full speed through all your connections. If you drop too much of the packets, it's going to slow down the connection overall.
I have a question, though.
Yeah.
You talk how too much buffer bloat slows you down, but then you've just added this jitter buffer feature to Speedify, where you add an extra buffer. Isn't that going to slow people down?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the application and what it's doing. So some applications are very sensitive to jitter or variations in latency of packets coming through or reordering. And so having packets arrive in a very consistent delay is better for that particular application. So sometimes they're willing to wait a little bit extra. It's okay for those packets to wait a little bit extra as long as they're coming through at a consistent rate. Certain streaming protocols that can be very good for, but other things, that extra delay can really tank the performance on it.
Right. So for a live stream like this, we're streaming out in real time across multiple internet connections. You guys are watching and typing comments back to us. If we added a quarter second of delay, nobody would notice. And if that stopped us from having any glitches or whatever where the audio dropped out or things pixelated for a moment, that'd be fine. That's worth it. But for anyone playing a video game online, it's a little twitchy, like adding an extra quarter second, you're out of the game, right? Unplayable. All right. So then UDP, TCP, while we're at, HTTP3 and Quic, how they handle latency.
Yeah, start with TCP and UDP. Those are kind of the main protocols that are used on the internet. A lot of things, HTTP is built on top of TCP. Well, except for the newer versions are built on top of UDP. We'll get to that in a second. But, TCP and UDP run a lot of the traffic on the internet. And so traditionally TCP is, the goal of it is to deliver everything that you sent in order and reliably, nothing gets lost. And if it has to slow down and resend things, resend data, resend packets in order to get it through reliably and everything in order, that's what TCP does. And so very early versions of TCP, if any packets got dropped, they would slow down significantly. If you're sending at this rate, they would drop their speed in half, really slow down and say, okay, I'm going to resend this packet again and make sure that it gets through. And then newer congestion control algorithms for TCP have come along where it's a little bit better about that. It's not going to necessarily drop your speed in half. It slows down just a little bit and backs off and gets better estimates of what your speed
can do. TCP is a
Yeah.
guaranteed protocol, right? Though the guarantee is they'll either get through your packets in order, all of them, or it will give you an error. Fine print of the guarantee. It could do both. It could get everything through in order just fine and still give you an error. But it's a rare case, right?
And so then UDP, on the other hand, is what people call an unreliable protocol. Packets are delivered on best effort. So packets get sent with UDP. There's no guarantee that they get through. Routers in the middle or the receiving computer could drop them. And so your receiving application on the other end might only get some of the packets through on UDP. Some people have built other protocols on top of UDP that then give you reliable delivery or attempts to retransmit UDP packets if they do get lost. Quic is one example of that, which is what HTTP3 is based on, where it kind of adds some of these elements of TCP of delivering things in order and reliably on top of UDP. And that can be good because UDP won't have some of these slowdowns when there's packet loss. So you have more flexibility of how you want to handle that packet loss and how the performance changes as, latency or packet loss changes or bandwidth, any of that. So yeah, there's can be some key differences. And so Speedify uses both TCP and UDP for communicating with the server transport protocols, and we can decide to use the different protocols under different circumstances. And so, yeah, Speedify is another example of where we've built a reliable delivery on top of UDP. So even though the underlying UDP packets could get lost on the network, Speedify will notice that and retransmit them and get your packets through reliably. We have some of that flexibility with UDP where, sometimes if there's a lot of packet loss or latency, Speedify can improve the performance that you see over that network because of how quickly we're retransmitting those packets and getting them through for the application over top notices that they're lost or doesn't see that those packets end up getting lost. So we can actually improve performance sometimes over an unreliable network doing that.
When should someone change the transport mode in Speedify?
The default is automatic, and we'll try different protocols and decide what we think works best, which a lot of the time TCP-based is going to work better in a lot of cases. Oh. But if you're seeing really high packet loss or latency on your networks, or your networks are very unreliable, sometimes switching to UDP can be the better option. Or you're doing things that are very latency sensitive, sometimes UDP traffic can get through quicker. In general, the TCP transport is going to be more efficient for Speedify.
But it's worth tossing in that one. Speedify's TCP transport is not like other VPN's TCP transport. So every other VPN makes one TCP socket to the server, and everything uploaded and downloaded goes over that one socket. And if you have apps using 100 sockets, well, then it jams 100 sockets into one. Speedify will make up to these days it's 8 TCP sockets to spread your traffic
over a single internet connection.
Each internet connection. Yeah. So a lot of the downsides of TCP that you'll read about you shouldn't run TCP over TCP, they actually just don't apply to us. We've sorted some of that out. So it can be sort of misleading. You can read about why VPNs should or shouldn't use TCP, and we've kind of found our way around a lot of the downsides. So, is gigabit bandwidth overrated?
I think it depends what you're doing with it. I think in a lot of cases, people don't really need gigabit bandwidth. And the nice thing about gigabit connections, a lot of times they come with reliability. You're talking about fiber connections that are very reliable. So that can be the benefit of those connections. But I think there's rare cases where somebody really needs gigabit internet. I mean, if you're doing big downloads and stuff like that, they get through very quickly. You're downloading your big games, things like that. It can be very nice to have that bandwidth when you need it. But a lot of stuff that people are doing in your video calls, watching videos, and browsing the internet, those all don't use that much bandwidth usually. They're more worried about getting quick responses from the internet. And video call, you need some amount of bandwidth, but if you have 5-10 megabits, that's usually plenty for doing a video call. But you want it to be reliable and low latency.
So my rule of thumb in 2025, and if VR takes off, all these numbers are going to go up. My rule of thumb is that you want 25 megabits per device that's being used right now. Your TV, if that's on, that's 25 megabits. You're on your laptop, another 25 megabits. Kids on the iPad, they need another 25 megabits. So if you can hit that, no one's going to complain that your internet's slow. I mean, you can start doing speed tests and say, why isn't this higher? But honestly, if you have 25 megabits per device that everyone's on, after all, more than half the time, people are staring at the screens, not actually downloading anything till they click the next link. So if you really have 25 megabits for every device that's being used right now, no one's going to complain. I know people need it. We've got John Paul here who's talking about his 2.5 gigabit internet connection and how he's trying to get more speed out of it. And I respect that. I just suspect the other people in his house won't notice. John says, OS updates, game updates, remotely accessing and consuming content over tailscale. He's giving reasons why 25 megabits isn't enough. Yeah, when you are in the middle of downloading a new operating system, sometimes you actually can use a couple hundred megabits. I'm just saying it's pretty rare. There are professional video editors who work from home, they actually can discover that a gigabit is not enough. I'm not anti-bandwidth here. Yeah. If you are editing 4K videos, you download 3 hours of 4K footage from yesterday's film shot, and you add special effects to them, and then you have to upload them again, and the studio is waiting for them. There are not enough gigabits in the world. No matter how fast your internet is, you need faster.
And that's upload speeds is where people more often are running into problems. Usually, a lot of internet connections have ample download speeds now, but the upload speeds are what suffer. Cellular connections, cable connections, hundreds of megabits of download speed, and then you get less than 10 megabits of upload, and that can be really crippling for some people. If you're trying to live stream or trying to do anything, upload things, it can be very slow.
Yeah, and they really went way too far. Maybe having it download twice as fast as your upload might be acceptable, but a lot of these connections, ADSL and stuff, got 600 down, 40 up. Yeah. I mean, to me, They're saying 600 megabits. That's good enough for 24 computers. No, it's 40 up, man. It's good enough for 2 computers.
And that's the business plan. I don't know if they've changed the residential stuff, but I used to get 6 megabits, 5 or 6 megabits of upload years ago.
Yeah, so that is totally unacceptable. I think that internet connections should only be able to advertise the slower of their upload or download speeds. If it's 600 down, 40 up, that should be advertised as a 40 megabit internet connection. Roy says, I've been experimenting with Jitter buffer. What is the upper limit to how much delay I can add?
It's going to depend on the particular application you're using. I mean, I would say as an upper limit, adding more than a second or something like that is not going to be helpful. Adding too much latency is going to be detrimental to it, depending on your particular application. Obviously, if you're doing something more real time, you don't want to add a lot of latency. If you're doing something with streaming that's TCP based, RTMP, things like that, that can be more affected by latency, so you probably don't want to go quite as high with the buffer. But if that's something that's UDP based, sometimes that can be more forgiving with adding additional latency in terms of performance and things like that. So yeah, it depends exactly what you're doing with it, experiment around. But yeah, I would say we default to 75 milliseconds. That's applied in each direction, because we're talking about streams going. It's going to apply 75 milliseconds in the outgoing direction, but it can also apply in the incoming direction. So it ends up 150 milliseconds of round trip time by default on the jitter buffer. And if you have connections that are higher latency than that, you want to try and set the jitter buffer that it's going to be more than the latency of any of your connections, so that we can send packets around different connections and it'll still all get delivered at a consistent delay. But yeah, if you start getting up into hundreds of milliseconds, that can start to affect things. So you got to play around a little bit with your particular application.
So I think that in our current release, the actual limit is 65,000 milliseconds, which makes no sense at all, right? I mean, it would instantly break your internet. So we're going to have a minor release one of these days that probably stops you from setting it more above 2 seconds. I don't know why anyone would ever want to add 2 seconds, maybe 1 second. Some number that's higher than most people want. But right now it's absurd. You put that in, you'd be off the internet. How crucial is fixed delay and max redundant when bonding 2 different cell carriers for cloud gaming?
So for gaming, you probably don't want the fixed delay. So I guess the max redundant setting is controlling how many connections can you use redundantly at the same time. So if you had like 10 internet connections, you don't necessarily want to send all your traffic across all 10 internet connections at the same time. You can tell Speedify, pick the top 2 best connections or the top 3 best connections at a time, and if one of them fails, it'll pick the next one. So that's what the maximum redundant setting does. But yeah, if you're doing gaming, redundant mode can be a good option, because that'll send traffic across multiple connections at the same time and deliver whatever gets through first. So it helps to minimize your latency and increases your reliability. So that can be a good option. But yeah, you probably don't want go ahead.
Just to be clear, so the fixed delay is the same as a jitter buffer. Just, the command line is called fixed delay, and the marketing materials and the web front end or whatever, it's called jitter buffer. The same thing. It is made to make things utterly consistent as far as their latency. When you're gaming, although it would be nice to have consistent latency, the really important thing, I think, for most people is to have the lowest possible latency. And so holding up a packet just so it doesn't arrive too early. In a phone call, that actually can make a lot of sense. But I think in a game where you're trying to go as fast as you can, it probably doesn't. You want to probably just get every command through as fast as you can. So redundant mode makes sense, because we'll actually send the same packet on both connections, and whichever one gets through first will deliver. Now, if latencies are coming and going, there are 2 ways to deal with it, right? So the redundant one, we send it on both, whichever gets through first, to kind of lower the jitter that way. But the jitter buffer, the fixed delay, makes a buffer and holds onto the packets for a while so that they come through smoothly. Kind of depends on the application, and gaming seems to be so twitchy that you wouldn't want to be held up. Using jitter buffer specifically for live streaming, RTMP, SRT, SRTLA, not sure if those are TCP or UDP. RTMP is TCP.
SRT is UDP based. So yeah, RTMP, if you increase the jitter buffer delay too much, you could start seeing it impacting performance some. So you probably want to go a little bit of buffer, but not too high. You can experiment what the right value is there. SRT might be a little more forgiving because it's UDP based. I mean, you still obviously have, if you have kind of the auto bitrate algorithms that are controlling, sometimes they're still dependent on feedback coming back. So if you had too much delay, sometimes they think, the connection's getting really bad, I better slow down the bitrate there. But generally, SRT should be a little more forgiving with extra delay.
I have a question, which one's better for gaming, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi or 5 gigahertz, and why?
I'd say in almost every case, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is going to be better. You're going to have higher speeds, more reliability. 2.4 gigahertz, there's usually lower maximum speeds. There's more chance of interference with other devices and other bands. 5 gigahertz has a much larger range of frequencies that it can use. 5 gigahertz is a little bit shorter range than 2.4 gigahertz, but assuming that you're somewhere in the vicinity of the router where you can get a good signal, definitely use 5 gigahertz if you can. That's going to be much more reliable, less likely to have interference. You can have much more latency spikes and more packet drops and things like that on 2.4 gigahertz.
So 2.4 gigahertz has 80 megahertz of spectrum, and the 5 gigahertz band, 400 megahertz, somewhere around there. I'm not remembering the exact number. So there's a lot more bandwidth. And the 2.4 gigahertz, since it's been around for longer, it has a lot more devices. My thermostats always use the 2.4 gigahertz. A lot of the cheap baby monitors and the tests on those cheap baby monitors are awful. They slow down 2.4 gigahertz for a mile around them. They're just streaming the audio and they never back off. Long beyond the range where you could pick up the baby monitor. It is slowing down 2.4 gigahertz for, blocks and blocks. A Russian live streamer I follow was excited about the idea of using a Starlink to stream places, but was disappointed to find it wasn't available in their region. My question is, does Starlink turn off their satellites when they're going over countries that don't allow them, or does it just refuse stuff based on location? I believe they turn off their transmit antennas. The satellite stays on when it goes over, but the countries, they have the right to control what radio waves are sent down into their air. They're actually turning off their transmitters when they're over countries. They're probably still listening, right? But they're careful to not transmit anything if they don't have permission to transmit anything when they're over a particular country. With Intel dropping support for Windows 11 and popular chipset used in SFP Plus cards, and the slow but growing use of SFP in homes, will we likely see an affordable Windows 11 card in the future? So SFP is the really high-speed network adapters. The front end is pluggable, so you can either plug in Ethernet and get your 2.5, 5 gigabit Ethernet, or you can plug in like a fiber optic laser module, same protocol. So it's just this little front end you plug into that square opening on the front of your router or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about
it. Doesn't seem very consumer-friendly.
Yeah, maybe servers and stuff like that, but in terms of a home, I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen it used a whole lot in homes other than people doing like home lab stuff. And as internet connections get faster and things like that, maybe that's...
Several cards on Amazon that have hacks to get Windows 10 drivers to work. I'm actually surprised there's a big driver problem there. I've noticed I've only run Linux with SFP cards.
Right, yeah, I haven't tried to use that stuff on Windows.
I've never used any other operating system with them. How does Apple's new N1 wireless chip look to you guys? Will Speedify be even faster? Looks good. Some of their wireless chips have been nice and fast, but missing a few things, like unable to go to certain bands and stuff. But I think with the new N1, I think they've really fixed everything now. I think it's just a fantastic, cheap wireless chip. Now, of course, they'll keep to themselves. You'll see it in every Mac and every iPhone and every iPad. So they bought Intel's wireless technologies. And so now it's been a couple of years, and they've turned it into a truly Apple product. N1 Bluetooth 6, is it worthy enough for pair and share? I don't know. I guess we'll have to retest it. Our past experiences with Bluetooth have been very poor. Even the newer Bluetooth standards where it can go 5 megabits. You actually try to do internet over it, you don't get a megabit ever.
And the latency
is horrifying. It's very strange. It'll add 150 milliseconds to your latency, which, given that Bluetooth is inherently low latency, so it can do, audio, right? There's no delay when you have, headphones on. That's all over Bluetooth. But somehow doing the Bluetooth internet drops you below a megabit and adds 150 milliseconds. So one of the rules in Speedify is if it ever realizes that an internet connection is over Bluetooth right now, we instantly drop it to backup, unless the user goes in and says, no, move this back to secondary, move this back to primary. In automatic Bluetooth, we put it as a backup. It is the last resort. We won't even try it unless everything else is broken. It is very possible that Apple has finally fixed it. But I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly announcing, now this new version, now it's 5 megabits. Try it. No, not if you're doing internet over it. Pair and share with jitter buffer plus Bluetooth equals gold. Not unless Bluetooth is much better.
Yeah, Bluetooth,
right now,
sucks.
Bluetooth sucks, man.
For internet, Bluetooth is great for
audio.
Yeah,
nice for
audio.
headphones,
Yeah.
but I would not put the internet over it unless maybe this Bluetooth 6 on the new N1 chip that no one's got to see yet will magically fix it.
I doubt it, though. I don't think that's their priority, is having high-speed internet over Bluetooth.
But yeah, nothing they've done to date has implied that that's coming. Wi-Fi aware, won't that help parent share without the same network or no? Yes, I mean, we have to write some code here, and we kind of started it. So Wi-Fi aware, it's a Wi-Fi direct thing where phones and computers can, if they run this protocol, connect directly to each other without going through a Wi-Fi router. It's a neat technology, and up until now, no Apple product has supported it. So we haven't bothered because it is so frustrating to people to say, well, you know, Android phone can connect to your PC, but your iPhone can't connect, and the Android phone can't connect to your Mac, and bleh. Apple says they're going to support it on the iPhone. Oddly, none of us saw anything about them supporting it on the Mac. It's a little odd, but maybe they just didn't announce it. So we'll see what happens here. You're thinking about it. John Paul, thought on Apple's memory integrity enforcement. That seems really cool. Have you looked at that?
I haven't. I'll be honest, I didn't watch the Apple thing. I haven't looked into that stuff yet. I'm waiting for summaries.
Right. So there's foolishness in the Apple thing. They've got a case with a built-in strap so you can wear your phone as a purse. So there's a bunch of nonsense in the Apple announcement. But there was also awesome stuff. The memory integrity enforcement and the new processors in the iPhone 17, the iPhone Air, the iPhone 17 Pro Max. It enforces memory integrity at a level that no processor I've ever heard of has before. In fact, for software developers, there's something called the address sanitizer that Google created, where you can compile your program to crash if you ever mess up and corrupt memory. Just the instant you do it, it crashes it. And it's really cool because when you're testing the software, you build it with this, and we do this. When we're testing Speedify, it's built with the address sanitizer from Google. So if we mess up, it crashes. And we're immediately like, whoa, what happened? And we run around and we fix it long before it gets to you. But the problem with the address sanitizer is it makes your program much slower. It adds all these extra checks every single time you do anything and make sure you didn't mess up. And that ends up slowing down the program. Apple built this stuff into the processor in hardware. I'm sure it made the processor much more complicated. I'm sure there's extra circuitry and it's using some amount of extra power. But as far as we're all concerned, it's free. So if a program running on these new iPhones messes up and loses track of memory, touches memory that it freed, or touches memory that belongs to the process, but it didn't malloc to turn it into an object yet, it will crash. And that's good. You might think, oh, it's not good to have, I'd rather have my programs not crash. And turns out, if that's what you're thinking, I'm afraid to say you're wrong. Once you've gone off the track to memory, your program is just doing stuff. You are so much better to have it crash so you can complain, so people get error messages, so they can fix it so it never does that again. That is the right way to go.
Yeah, a lot of these security vulnerabilities you end up hearing about are due to things like this, where things are writing to memory they're not supposed to, or they're not cleaning up things correctly, and clever people figure out ways to insert things into memory and have the programs execute it. And trampling on memory and using memory you're not supposed to can cause all sorts of problems in the system.
Yeah, they made an interesting point, too, that them doing this on the iPhones will actually probably reduce these errors for everyone in the industry. Because any time any piece of a program, the program's compiled for the iPhone, if a library is also used in some iPhone app, if it has these bugs, it will crash on the iPhone. They'll fix it because of the iPhone. And the rest of people will, and I think it's true, will get bug fixes based on the version that ran on the iPhone, found all the bugs.
I do know there is a hardware sanitizer stuff for Android, too, that I've never used that much. I tried using it once and couldn't get it working right. But I know on Android they have some hardware-supported sanitizer stuff as well.
Oh, yeah, there's an HW SAN.
Yeah.
Yeah, my Android phone was too old to use it. I guess you'll be upgrading to the new 17. Yes. I have not discussed this with my wife yet, but I am still on the 12 Pro. So I think it's time for me to update to the 17 and get the memory integrity testing. You know, it's a business expense. We need to test Speedify with the new memory integrity. So it is time for me to upgrade.
I won't be. I use Android.
If you upgrade to the iPhone 17, you'll also get Wi-Fi 7. Wi-Fi 7, that's right, Ryan. That's very exciting to me. So Wi-Fi 7 has the ability to run at 6 gigahertz. So regular Wi-Fi, it started at 2.4 gigahertz. Actually, it started at 5 gigahertz, but it didn't get popular. And then they switched to 2.4 gigahertz in 802.11b, and it became popular. And then they switched back to 5 gigahertz in later versions. But Wi-Fi 7, there's now 6 gigahertz. This whole new band. Slightly shorter ranged, but there's so much bandwidth. Nobody on my block is using it yet. My Wi-Fi routers support it. I've got those Eero Max 7s. Nobody has ever connected on that band yet. I just don't have any gear that does it. None of my neighbors have any gear that do it. So for a little while, I would own the airwaves.
Yeah. I mean, the 6 gigahertz is very short range, too.
It is very short range, but, I've got 2 routers covering my not-so-huge house.
But meaning that it's probably not going to conflict with your neighbors very much. It's probably more isolated within your house.
If you were using Speedify with your wired home network that has very good speed, but wish to also have your phone's hotspot 5G also connected as a safeguard, how exactly would you set that up in Speedify?
So
I think the answer is parent share, right?
Right, yeah, you can use parent share. I'm just trying to see where they're running. If you have a router device, it's serving your whole home network with Speedify. That's one option. So you get a router type device, and then you run either if you have a separate router that you're distributing, or that's the router, you can have the Speedify. If you're running a separate device, you can have Speedify plug into the WAN port of your existing router, and then you don't have to change anything about your home network. Or you can have your new router that runs Speedify be your router for your home network. And then, using parent share, like we were just talking about, you can run Speedify on your phone, have that connect to the router, and you tell it to pair with the Speedify instance running on your router, and then Speedify can make use of that as well. The one current limitation is we only do up to 10 megabits from your cellular connection, so if you're expecting to get your full 5G speed out of it, it won't do that. If that's the case, you may have to tether into an existing router or something like that, or manually connect it in to get full 5G speeds.
Question related to live streaming. That answer still works, but if you're in the middle of a live stream, I feel like to me, that's like higher priority to the point where I would tether my phone to depends if you're live streaming from a computer, I would just straight up tether that phone to the computer and have a wired link, or, rather wireless. Wireless is pretty good these days, but USB-C cable between that computer can do gigabits with no packet loss. I would do that. I would try to get direct wires if you're doing a live stream and your audience is watching.
Yeah, and then just run Speedify directly on the computer. You don't need to mess around with running it on a router or whatever. If that's the computer you care about running the live stream, just run Speedify on that computer. You don't need to have it on your home network necessarily.
Part 2, would you change it if the connection was hotel Wi-Fi and a 5G hotspot? If it was hotel Wi-Fi and 5G, I would not have the hotel Wi-Fi be primary and the 5G be secondary. Either make them both primary, or I'd make the 5G primary and the hotel Wi-Fi secondary. I would play with it a little bit. I've been consulting with people and recommending Speedify for traveling sports broadcasters, and I tell them to get their phone close to a window and make it a priority. Yeah, signal strength. Strikeout says, I currently run Speedify on a mobile travel router Slate 7 for live streaming sports events. I've never tried the pair and share. How do you make that work with the router? It might even be the default.
Yeah, I think we default it to the router will accept.
You want to set it, I think this is the default on OpenWrt, that the router is set to accept any offers to use the cellular that it receives from any phones that are connected to it. But all you have to do is join its hotspot with a phone with Speedify on it, and there in pair and share, you'll see under Discovered Devices, the Slate 7 router. You can pick it, offer to share your cellular with it, and it should automatically accept it without having to do anything on the router.
And then, depending what connections you have on your router, you can have the cellular be a backup if you wanted to. So if the main internet goes out, Speedify will switch over to using the pair and share backup. Or if you want to actually bond in, depending if you're traveling around and stuff and you actually want to bond in the pair and share connection, you can have it at a secondary, and you configure the other connections to be similar priority, have them all bonded together.
How do I install Speedify on the phones that connected to that router?
So you go to whichever app store, whether you're Android or iOS, you can go to the app store and search for Speedify and download the Speedify app. Assuming you have your same account where it's already installed on the router, you can log in with that on your phone as well. You should be able to find each other, and once it's connected to the router, they should be able to see each other under the pair and share settings, discover each other.
To do that, was it easy to set up? Pretty easy?
We have instructions for installing. It should be pretty easy to install Speedify. As long as your router is supported. There's lots of different types of routers out there.
We've been, in recent months, really trying to make sure that Speedify works well on OpenWrt, and so many people have been coming to us with an OpenWrt device that has turned out to be a GLI net router, that we've put in extra effort to make sure it works well on the GLI nets, and that is continuing. So we support OpenWrt. We tried to make the install work nicely. We have documentation up. Any issues with using Speedify with the Miri X510 in front of UniFi network? Need more upload speed options? Want to bring in multiple Starlink 5G cable modems?
Starlink, yeah.
I think, you can put up an X510 and have all your internet connections run into it, and then one of the LAN ports you run Ethernet to your UniFi system. Actually, we're doing that in the office. We have that running in our lab right now in order to stop Will and Kevin from bringing down the whole real network. They're on a UniFi, which is separate from the real network.
Yeah, that should work fine.
Oh, look, the Miri X510. This is what they're talking about. Badass router from Miri Technologies. This puppy has a 5G modem, a 4G modem, so two totally separate SIM cards with separate radios. Can be on two carriers at once. Got Wi-Fi 6, 5 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. It has 4 Ethernet ports, all of which can be, up or down. They come by default with 2 marked as WAN and 2 marked as LAN, but in fact, in the software, you can change any of them to be anything. And then on the front, you've got 2 USB ports where you can tether phones, Android, iPhone, 4G USB dongles. It's got the drivers for most of them. And it supports parent share. So you can end up with like 9 internet connections on this thing. Batteries, it uses NPF batteries, the sort of standard Sony ones. They're hot swappable. It needs 1 battery to run. So if one battery gets low, you can pop it out, put it on the charger, pop in another battery, and stay running all day on batteries. Or of course you can plug it in. So, this is the first router that was really built to run Speedify. And you can get it at Miri.tech. It's kind of high-end, rugged aluminum. You can use it on the desktop. You can use it in a backpack. We've got backpack kits for it. You can rack mount it, half width 1U, and it comes with the mounting brackets. Or you can put, there are a bunch of other half-U digital video encoders you can put next to it and put a little plate so you can mount this in a rack. Just a great little device. On the Miri X510, can I ask Alex, does he think it's worth the money? And do you stand by such a product because you're going to make a sale? The X510 is, with 15 months of Speedify service, it's like $2,000. Is it worth it? Yes, if you need this sort of thing. So for people who are like live streaming sports events, and that is how you make a living, this is worth it. You pop 2 SIM cards in, you're on like AT&T and Verizon, or Verizon T-Mobile, or whatever. You get on 2 different carriers. You can plug in Starlinks, bind a Starlink to the cellular. People who need a third, I've seen people with another 4G modem plugged in the front. And it's rugged. You can carry this thing around. You can drop this thing and it won't break. So yeah, it's actually very worth the money. If you look for similar rugged routers, holy cow, like why is this only $2,000? Like you can look and say, why is this Wi-Fi router $2,000? Go look for rugged Wi-Fi routers with 2 cellular modems. Holy cow, are there some expensive routers. So if you're in that category of professional streamer, yeah, it's worth it. It's a bargain next to if you go look at what a Peplink would cost you to, get their unbreakable VPN service on top, and you will realize that this thing is in fact like half price and it has real Speedify on it, so why wouldn't you? Now, am I biased because I get some money if you buy one? Yeah, it's not much use unless you buy a Speedify license. That said, it's a great product. I have Frontier Fiber 2 gigabit service. They provide an Eero 7 Pro Max router. In your opinion, is the router good at quality service? Handle Bufferbloat. So that is my home router, and I've got it on a 1 gig service. I don't know about specifics of quality service and Bufferbloat. I'm not really using it. It's kind of... Also, my rule of thumb, and I talked about this once before, was my actual goal is to get 200 megabits to every square inch of my property. My basement, my garage, my driveway, my attic, and I got it by using 2 Eero 7 Pro routers, right? In some places, my speeds are much higher than that, but that was my goal. I don't want there to be anywhere in or around my home where I can't get 200 megabits, and using 2 of those and a gigabit fiber, I got it. Be really nice. If you're really obsessed about this stuff, I think you can use an Ethernet line. That's best. Take the wireless out. If you can switch over to Wi-Fi 7, which of course will need the new iPhones that are coming out like in a week, but if you can get onto that 6 gigahertz band where no one else is interfering with you, I think you probably have more problems, depending on where you are, with other devices interfering with you than anything to do with your 2 gigabit fiber. Guys, can you bring any solution to deploy Speedify directly to TP-Link Wi-Fi routers? It's going to be so awesome to have it set up that way. Maybe Speedify Universal OS for routers. That would be great. So we support OpenWrt
On ARM processors.
and we support Debian on ARM and x86. I think TP-Links are ARMs, but I think...
Yeah, some of them may still be MIPS. I don't know. I guess it depends on the particular TP-Link device, but I don't know if any of them run OpenWrt or not. I think you could potentially flash OpenWrt onto some of those models, but I don't think any of them come with that.
So there's some talk of, and people like Purple and, RDK people in industry are talking about kind of standardizing router applications. And we're a big fan of this idea that, routers should be running apps in Docker containers. So you should be able to put something like Speedify in a package with a, meta information, a description of what it needs from the router, and it should be able to run on like any router. It's a nice vision. If they get it going, we will support it. Chatting with people there. I mean, we do, in fact, run Speedify in Docker containers. It makes it easier for us to test, but that's not how most routers are set up. So when you install it, we just install Speedify in your operating system, not in a container. Does OpenWrt work on NetGear? NetGear routers are OpenWrt.
Some of them. I wouldn't say that blanket statement, but
right.
yeah.
I have seen NetGear routers. With the NetGear operating system, it's OpenWrt under the covers. So at the very least, if you can get root access, you can SSH in, you can install the Speedify command line and have that. I have a network connection with a dynamic IP. What's the best way to change it to static?
Yeah, that depends. That's not always possible. It depends what you mean. So yeah, if you're getting a dynamic IP address from your ISP, you can't necessarily just change it to static. Sometimes you have options that you can pay an ISP, depending on the ISP, for a consistent public IP address, if that's what you're talking about.
A lot of people discover that what they really want is the name, that if the name stayed the same, that's good enough. So there's, the DDNS, dynamic DNS, or essentially every time your computer comes online, it sends its IP address off and the DNS server quickly changes your name to map to your new IP address.
But yeah, I guess I'm not sure whether you're talking about public IP addresses or on a local LAN network, because certainly you're talking about a local LAN, usually in your router, there's settings that you can configure a particular device. Like tunneling.
Usually, I guess if you're going to dynamic, but I mean, mostly the answer these days with stuff like Tailscale.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody's connecting out.
And then you have this kind of virtual overlay network where everything gets consistent IP addresses, or you can assign consistent IP addresses to things and talk to them that way over the kind of overlay network. What are you trying to do with this static IP? Are you trying to host a server or host services, or you just want to connect back into your house? I guess it depends what you want to do. I want to host a server. So I guess it depends whether it's for personal use. Like if you're just hosting something that you specifically want to access, there's ways to do things, port forwarding through a particular port. And I mean, obviously you need a consistent IP address. So yeah, you can do things like dynamic DNS. But if this is something that you want lots of people accessing, it might be less likely to be able to jump through hoops and things like that to get it working. Host a public website.
There are lots of other solutions that are kind of personal better. My home network, the server I'm running, everything, Home Assistant is coordinating my whole home network on a Raspberry Pi 5. I am paying them the $60 a year so that I can go to their website and it's all proxied through, and I can log into my Raspberry Pi, and I can even bring up a web-based terminal, and I can type commands as root and get all over my network from in the browser through an HTTP proxy, right? I mean, my Raspberry Pi is connecting out to them, and then I'm connecting there. Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to run a pub, I have to be honest, these days, it's physically possible, but you're going the wrong direction.
Yeah, hosting providers can be much easier. You get a consistent static IP address from them, and you can spend, if you don't need a whole lot of resources, you can spend a couple bucks a month and get a hosted server from a hosting provider, and it's pretty easy to set up.
They're like $5 a month options, which
they're not great, but they'll do it.
They're not great, but that might cost
support a few
less
users
than the electricity of keeping that old laptop on all day long.
And the hassle of trying to set up.
It might be less.
I don't know where you're located, but like in the US, there's DigitalOcean, Linode, and Volta, or some of the lower cost hosting providers that you can find kind of cheap options that give you full control over the server. And something like AWS is probably more costly, but that's another option.
I had a question about port forwarding. Doing port forward will increase my network speed download server.
No. So what port forwarding does, so by default, Speedify will not allow, and most routers are not going to allow any incoming traffic from the internet. Somebody trying to connect into your computer and on your home network, most routers are not going to allow that by default.
They make sure that you send something to that other computer first. And once you send something, then it's allowed to send stuff back. But you have to start the conversation normally.
Yeah, so what port forwarding does is it takes a particular port and says, I want to allow this port to come through and send traffic to this device on my network. So you can configure that a lot of times in your router. So if something arrives at your router out from the internet, you can say, send this port to this device over here, this particular PC, and your router will let it go through. And so Speedify has that option with dedicated servers, because that gets tricky on a public server. You have lots of different users using the same server, saying that one user can claim this particular port for themselves. Doesn't really work out. But if you have a dedicated server, you can say, I want this particular port to go through to this particular Speedify client device. We can set it up that we'll let that port come through, where normally the server would block it and not let that incoming traffic come in, but you can open up those ports. So it's not going to necessarily make anything faster, other than maybe really specific cases where you need to do peer-to-peer connections or something and you need to open up ports for that. But in most cases, it's not going to affect the speed. It's just more the accessibility of opening up things. Yeah, a dedicated server, typically, but this varies by location, but typically our dedicated servers...
If you connect Speedify without a dedicated server, you can expect to reliably get 200-300 megabits, assuming your internet's that fast.
Right, and then our dedicated servers, we advertise usually up to a gigabit. You obviously still need to have, if you're getting the 200 to 300 megabits out of a public server, and that's what your internet connection support added up combined, getting a dedicated server isn't going to necessarily give you any faster speeds. It reduces maybe some of your competition with other people on the same server if you're competing for bandwidth. We generally manage the...
And the dedicated server also gets gets you port forwarding
Right.
as a feature in Speedify.
But it doesn't
Which
sound like that's
I
what you
don't
need.
think you need, but if you do need it, you need the dedicated server. Donovan asks, what about bonding multiple connections to get faster than 1 gigabit with Speedify? It is possible if you have a dedicated server. We don't have the sort of speeds on a normal public server. So if you get a dedicated server, and I would talk to us about it, it is possible. It does take a fair amount of CPU power. Not a huge amount, but we've seen, like Raspberry Pi 4s run out of CPU before they hit a gigabit, but Raspberry Pi 5s don't. A lot of routers have pretty low-end CPUs, but if you're running it on a, M4 MacBook, you're not going to run out of CPU. Yeah. So there's some caveats and tricky things about getting it really working, but we've seen it. Just one time we tried to see if we get Speedify to max out a 40 gigabit internet connection. It could. We had to set up a special 40 gigabit speed server and a 40 gigabit client, and it worked, but it was kind of a special case. Can I combine all three of my 400 megabit broadband connections? Can I get 1.2 gigabit speeds with Speedify? So if you combine three 400 megabit internet connections, so our rule of thumb is if everything goes well, expect 90% of them added up. But there's such a good chance you run out of something, right? When you're starting to get to these speeds. Could it be CPU? Could it be your bus? Can your computer really move 1.2 gigabits? It's a new computer, it's a Mac M4, should be able to. But it's very easy to run out of something. You'll certainly be able to get higher than 400 megabits, but you might hit a bottleneck before you hit that greater than 1 gigabit.
Yeah, and as we mentioned with the last one, you want to get a dedicated server with Speedify if you're trying to do speeds that high.
Ziply Fiber offers 50 gigabits in the Northwest. Look, most computers sold these days, you can't get that kind of speed in or out of it.
Right. So yeah, you're dealing with
You
multiple
have
computers
to buy
on the network.
this high-end thing with probably those SPF connectors that someone else was asking about. My Mac doesn't have a 50 gigabit anything, right? The USB 3 can go multiple gigabits, but the Wi-Fi is limited to hundreds of megabits, and it doesn't have built-in Ethernet.
And even those
I don't
things,
think I can
Ethernet
get
port.
more than 3 gigabits into my Mac.
Yeah, most Ethernet ports are gigabit. You're starting to see 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports on certain devices becoming a little more popular now. But yeah, buying all the equipment for once it comes into the router, buying all the equipment for switches or things like that on your network and cables to support those types of speeds, it's a big investment. But yeah, if you have lots of different devices using that connection, that can be useful.
Guys, a weird issue. I have 400 megabits broadband, and with AdGuard DNS, I get around 100 megabit speeds max on Drive and YouTube uploads, whereas Google or Cloudflare DNS fixes it. Does DNS also affect upload speeds?
So not directly, but what may be happening when you look up DNS, you're saying, what is DNS tells you for this particular URL or host name, what IP address does it go to? And so it could be that the AdGuard service is giving you a different IP address that's maybe further away than what you get with the Google or the Cloudflare one. So it could be directing you to a server that's further away and you're getting less performance to that further away server. Might be what's happening.
Could also be a IPv4 versus IPv6 thing.
That's also possible,
Maybe AdGuard's only giving the IPv4 and maybe IPv6 is faster to it, and you get that when you use the other.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about over Speedify. We don't have IPv6 support, but I don't. Assuming you're talking about Speedify, does it change if you use different Speedify server locations? Do you get different results there? But yeah, if you have a specific server where you're seeing that difference, and you can write into us and let us know, and we can investigate a little bit more. We could see where it's pointing for those different things.
All right, guys. I think we're going to call it. We got to feed the Kevin, or it gets cranky. You're both the coolest kind of nerds I have seen for a while. I say nerd as a compliment because I am proud of it. You two are both gems. Thank you, guys. We appreciate you guys.
Take that as a compliment.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We will see you all online.